Did you know that in the 16th century there was a Saint Teresa who was held on trial for something that we would look at today and call Gnosticism or mysticism? And this is a fun story, and my guest Vivian Taylor is going to tell us all about it. So grab your coffee or your tea and stay tuned. Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today, joining me for the who knows how many times now, Vivian Taylor, one of the regulars on this channel. You're on here every month or two or something. Always changing up the subject, getting into some interesting stuff like tonight. So, how you doing?
I'm rocking and rolling. I'm very happy to be here. This one is actually a little bit special. The reason that I started working on Teresa Vivia's interior castle is because I help lead a theology book club at my parish in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And the folks in my book club, without my input, wanted to read the interior castle this past spring. And so I got into reading the backstory on this, the history of this, at once very easily available spiritual work that is actually also incredibly weird and has really interesting either similarities or harmonies with some 3rd and 2nd century Gnostic beliefs about ascent mysticism, sort of Christian ideas of, Merkaba mysticism. We're talking about the Books of Jeu here tonight as well. The Books of Jeu are some of the clearest in the Gnostic framework rituals for ascending to the highest unknowable God. And the fun stuff about the Books of Jeu, and I'm going to get to Saint Teresa because really I have a lot more detail on that because the Books of Jeu are incredibly dense, but also kind of simple because the Books of Jeu are literally like a computer manual. Here are the processes that you have to work out. Here are the divine names you need to remember. And if you do these rituals with these divine names while holding these ciphers and this way, you can get through the various heavens.
Wow. So it's kind of like you get like the Apocalypse of John where there's these ascension realms, right?
Absolutely.
So I can see why people would call it Gnostic then. There's a reason that it definitely lines up with these Gnostic texts that they come out of Nag Hammadi. But it's very much like in that vein, right?
Sort of. It's so the Books of Jeu are fascinating because they're written a little bit later than the Nag Hammadi texts, and they are both very well aware of a lot of what we would think of New Testament texts, as well as like Sethian Gnostic texts, where literally, in the Book of Jeu, a lot of the big characters from like the secret book of John turn up as these lesser deities because you have this multi-layered heaven. There are 60 layers of heaven in the Book of Jeu.
Whoa, that's a lot.
No, they got them on discount, and you have to remember. For each heaven, there's like a big god and 3 watchers and 12 Olympian-style gods.
Really?
Oh, and you have to remember the names of all of them and do certain rituals with it. And over and over. But
Sounds Orphic. It sounds like some Orphic shit. Because that's how got to memorize things when you go to Hades to get through these passages, to get through like to the next level or whatever. So that's what it sounds like to me.
Absolutely. And from a lot of the academic stuff I've read on it, it seems like it's also heavily connected to like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, this like process where you have to go through various heavenly realms, and you have to like understand the gods you're dealing with, be able to know what to say to them, and get through. Now, in the Books of Jeu, it's Jesus who is telling people what to do. There are 2 Books of Jeu. There's also another text with them, which I haven't really gotten into, called the Pistis Sophia. But in one Jeu, it is sort of this process is kind of set in like the literal planetary heavens. Like first you go through the planetary sphere, and then out into the galactic sphere, and then out into the supergalactic sphere or whatever. Like if you are interested in like Gnosticism as Jesus teaching you how to fly through space to eventually reach the true God, Book of Jeu 1 is for you. Book of Jeu 2, it's a little more Platonic, where like, you know, if you've ever seen the diagram of like the Platonic system where like the unknowable God is up here and then the aeons are down here, like whatever that up and down on the diagram represents that kind of heavenly space, that's more Book of Jeu 2. But the thing about the Books of Jeu is that they are very clear on there being rituals that are effective to get you from point A to point B to point heaven. And going back to like the secret book of John, the Apocryphon of John, the Sethian Gnostic story, Yaldabaoth, Sabaoth, the unknowable God, and Barbello all turn up as like lesser deities in this stacked heaven situation. In the like 60 heavens, and there are specific ritual activities and specific incantations, which if you do them in the right order, you get through. And it's like the disciples say to Jesus in the Book of Jeu, this is so complicated. Why would it possibly be like this? And Jesus is like, well, you know, the big secret is if you just use my name, you get a pass. So that's sort of the Book of Jeu. It is almost infinitely more complicated than that. There are literally just ranks and ranks and ranks of different kinds of gods and elements that you have to understand, and which I will admit I don't really understand. But
no, that's interesting. What I want to do is I want to first get into the history of this this patron saint, if we could.
Okay.
So let's set the setting is it's the 15, what is it, late 1500s?
So let's first go to 300 years before Teresa. Let's leave the 3rd century behind. Let's jump in the time machine and jump forward to southern France in the early 1200s. There was a theory, and hey, nowadays there is all sorts of argument about whether or not the Cathars actually existed, whether or not they were actually like a Gnostic group descended from the Bogomils, descended from the Manichaeans, descended from some other earlier Gnostic group, or like whether this was a creation of like the church as a bad guy, or if it was like a proto-Protestant thing which was being misunderstood. Right. But whatever the case, it really seems like there was a strong belief within the Catholic Church that there was a group of Gnostics in southern France called the Cathars, the pure ones, who had their own Gnostic gospel that was somehow based on or connected to the Gospel of John. They believed in reincarnation, and they believed every time you reincarnated, you would come back as a different gender. So they believed that there should be no gender differences.
No way. That's crazy.
But But also, that may have just been something invented by the church to attack them. So,
Yeah.
but there's evidence of it. And this is like, there are a lot of veterans of the Crusades around. It's happening in Toulouse. Like the Count of Toulouse had been on the first crusade, Count Raymond, and had come back, and maybe the Cathars came back with them. Who knows? But the church wants them wiped out. Crusading has become a part of the church, and once you start wiping out, once you start crusading violence, there are a lot of things that you could use crusading violence for to get your way on. So they start out, there's a guy called Saint Dominic who is repeatedly mentioned in the interior castle humorously. Saint Dominic was a guy named Dominic Guzman who founded what is now known as the Dominican Order.
Very famous.
Yeah. And like the Dominican Republic is named after the Dominican Order. And if I say Dominicans, I don't mean to speak about people from the Dominican Republic, but rather monks of the
order. It's an order within the Catholic Church, right?
It is a monastic order, like the Franciscans.
Right.
Yeah. But the Dominican order was specifically founded to get rid of the Cathars. And
that was like why they formed. Is it?
Yes, they were founded originally to convert the Cathars via preaching, but by like 1222, I think, basically the Catholic Church declared an all-out crusade in southern France, and it was sort of like I was in the National Guard when I was in the Army as a chaplain's assistant. This was kind of the National Guard crusade. Like you only had to go for 30 days to get all your sins forgiven. So they had this constant problem where like knights are coming for 30 days and then leaving, so forces come. But it's a fucking brutal campaign. They do things like on the Feast of the Holy Innocents, load hundreds, if not thousands, of women and children into a church, lock the doors, and torch it in Béziers. Because there are like some towns that are connected to Toulouse who are defending the Cathars, and then they're being attacked. So eventually, the Catholic Church wipes out the Cathars. Toulouse is forced to make peace, but this is not the end of the desire of the Catholic Church to enforce a certain amount of purity on Christians. So what happened? The Cathars themselves are not wiped out in the crusade. There's still some around by the time the crusade ends. So the church starts the Inquisition, and it's the Dominican order that's running the Inquisition. And remember, this is still like 300 years before we get to Teresa of Avila. And I know all my fans are out there saying, oh, good, a story that's only 300 years long. But no, I promise I'll make it quick. So,
sure.
The violence in southern France quickly leads to more crusader violence that is aimed at retaking the Iberian Peninsula, like what is now Spain and Portugal, retaking the Iberian Peninsula from the Muslims who had taken the Iberian Peninsula all the way back in like 800.
Yeah, they had it for a while.
They had it for like centuries. There was a whole full-bore culture, population, civilization going on.
And people don't realize the Islamic Golden Age from 800 to like 1200. The Islamic Empire was the most powerful empire on the planet. Like they were way ahead of Europe as far as technology advancements, even culturally. It was their time. That was their time to be the big big person on the block. Like that's why they call it the Islamic Golden Age. It's rightfully called that. People don't realize that. A lot of people have no idea about that.
Absolutely. And like the Muslim kingdoms in Spain had a certain amount of their own autonomy compared, and so like they're a whole world there.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there was a lot of room for well-educated, wealthy not just well-educated, wealthy Jewish folks, but a very large population from sort of illiterate peasants to merchants to more clerical, and out of this, and there had also been a large Jewish population on the Iberian Peninsula. Literally, as long as we know about Judaism, there's some evidence. Like
Fardics.
yeah. I mean, there have been Jewish people. I believe that the earliest like archaeological evidence is like 300 or 400 BC of Jewish populations, but then there's also some references in the texts that could go back even farther.
Well, yeah. So, like, if you look at the Carthaginians, there's Carthage and there's Nova Carthage in Spain. Those are Punics. Those are Semitic people.
Absolutely. So, like, just to say that there had been a very large, very functional, very well-connected to other Jewish populations in other part of the world, population on the Iberian Peninsula, as long as there had been Judaism. And under the Muslim rule, the Jewish population of the Iberian Peninsula was doing pretty well. And you know, like, I am absolutely sure that there were complexities, you know, let me say, obviously, modern democracy, you know, would have been way better, I'm sure. But at the very least, this, like, one of the largest Jewish populations on earth that was the happiest and like most functional and like allowed to exist was there. And as the Christian crusaders closed in fighting the Muslims, the Christians also targeted the Jewish community. Now, the Jewish population, not just community. So basically, and there are a lot of details here, but about the richest third of the Jewish population, as I understand it, was forced to convert to Catholicism, and the poorest 2/3 was expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. The Ottoman Sultan took in a huge number of people, but I mean, it is just ethnic cleansing. Like,
that's what it was.
Crusading, hey, you know, crusading is bad. And
yeah.
What does it know? Let's all just work together for a world where there's no religious violence. But
it would be nice.
But anyway, not to editorialize as we just pass by one of like the great horrors of European history. But so this brings us to Teresa of Avia's family. It was her grandfather who was a Jewish man, a wealthy Jewish merchant guy who was forced to convert to Catholicism. And it sounds like it was miserable. Like, he had to wear like a yellow costume that made him look foolish and like wear it in procession and be mocked. And he had to do this for several weeks. And then this costume was hung at the back of the church as like an ongoing reminder. And it seems like he had a pretty rough time. His son moved to nearer to Avia and did better financially. And but by that time, even that second generation after the forced conversion, a lot of what they call conversio families were doing better financially. And, you know, and this is what we see in many cultures, you know, people adapt and people move forward. But as I understand it, basically, suddenly you have this large population of well-to-do people who are well-educated and who are doing well in the church. Because, like, let's just be real, the church loves having wealthy, well-educated people as priests and bishops, right? So suddenly there are more and more priests and bishops and high-ranking monks who are ethnically Jewish people. And you start getting a really intense, extremely racist pushback against this. And this comes out in a number of ways.
Have you ever heard that the Pope Borgia, who was Pope Alexander, his haters thought that like there was a rumor that he was Jewish? You ever heard about this?
I have not
Because
heard
he's a Spanish.
Yeah,
and they said because he's Spanish, he's probably Jewish. It was like a big anti-Semitic. Like all the people that didn't like Pope Alexander were calling him a Jew and saying he shouldn't be Pope. Blah 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 blah. And so I wonder if that's connected with that. But yeah.
Almost certainly. I'd have to look into the specifics of that situation. But yeah, so there begin to be blood quantum walls. And I know, like, this is all, I mean, doesn't that sound like that sounds like something from the 1940s,
right?
The 1540s, but we keep doing the same dumb stuff over and over because we're stupid as a human being. But maybe that's not it. Maybe we're just evil. No, wait, no, not that either.
It could be both.
But yeah, so you start getting blood quantum walls. And these are obviously horrible, but they start banning people of Jewish descent from various positions or priesthoods. So Teresa's mother died when she was pretty young, and she got a lot of her education and raising. Even though her father doted on her, it sounds like from like 10 on, as I understand it, she was basically raised by nuns and then went into being a nun herself in a Carmelite monastery when she was like 18 or 19. But the nunnery that she went into was at the time the only one in that area in like central Spain, what's now central Spain, sort of Toledo, Avila type proximity. It was the only one at the time that would allow people of Jewish descent to be nuns there. Like all the other nunneries around had instituted blood quantum walls. And I'll tell you the horrible part of the story now. So despite Teresa's fame, because she became a doctor of the church. Like Teresa as a mystic and a theologian is actually a very important figure. But even with that, and even with her popularity at the time, like 10 years after she died, her own nunnery put in blood quantum walls against Jewish people. And do you know when they lifted those blood quantum walls?
When?
Like the 1850s.
Damn, that's a whole 300 years. Those.
Like, yeah, I mean, how about that for a 300-year cycle? But,
right.
But, okay, so Teresa in the nunnery quickly becomes known as an extremely wise person. She's known for being very learned. Her father, doting on her, had bought her an entire library of theology books. So, she is not just for like a woman, but like for the time period, she is an extraordinarily well-read theologian. Like, you're not going to get much better than like a wealthy merchant's daughter in Toledo, Spain in 1500 when it comes to access to books. I mean, this is the same milieu within a couple hundred years that like produced the Zohar,
Right.
Like,
yeah.
So, and like, again, it is not for nothing that her family had been a religious Jewish family before this. And, people don't just totally forget their traditions when they're forced to convert. So there's always some question about like, what are we seeing in Teresa's spirituality? But anyway, so Teresa starts writing And her writing, it both becomes very popular and very meaningful, but it also gets the attention of, that's right, the Spanish Inquisition. And now the Inquisition, what was the old British comedy joke about no one expecting the Spanish Inquisition? I would say for Teresa, it seems like her awareness of the danger of the Inquisition to her was like a grinding weight on top of her that she is just like constantly aware of. And it's not, I've read a couple of different things and it's all a little fuzzy, but my understanding is basically she's writing more and more stuff. And her writings are starting to really be examined by the Inquisition, wondering if A, it's just Judaism, B, it's heresy like Catharism, like Gnosticism, or C, if it's heresy like Protestantism. Because at the time, there's a big Protestant movement, even in Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, that is like about interior illumination stuff. Because, you know, if you have from a more Protestant perspective, if you can have your own interior faith, then like, what do you need the Pope for? Gotcha.
Right.
So those are the three big possibilities that she is facing: that she's Jewish, that she's a Cathar, or that she's a Protestant, or something else. Or else, you know, she's just evil and, you know, you can't trust women generally. So eventually, Teresa is ordered by her confessor to write a prayer guide for her sisters. But while she is writing this, like, it's not clear what's going on to me, because I don't think she was actually tortured, but she has very serious health issues. And like, if she is someone who's been like questioned by the Inquisition in the 1500s, I just wonder if they're beating her up. But
I mean, we know that's the thing that was going on.
I want to be careful because I'm not like a Spanish historian. I don't want to like invent things. But like in this,
who was she arrested? Do you know who she was arrested by?
I've got the names around here somewhere. It was a Dominican brother who was, and she wasn't exactly arrested, but she was like held in her cell at the nunnery, and they took her library, examined it for signs of heresy, and then burned it.
Wow.
Burned her library. And so
did it ever describe what was in that library? Like what kind of stuff? We know about the Book of Jeu, but nothing else.
We don't know. We don't. It's just gone. And even in her own writing, she like talks about missing her library, and she like is just trying to remember everything she's ever written because it was taken away. And you start getting these very weird stories. Like there are people who claim that like she would just appear hundreds of miles away from where she had been. There are people who believe that she was floating. She was having raptures where like she's maybe having seizures, maybe something else. She has like migraine headaches. She writes about her migraines a lot. Like I have a family member who deals with migraines, and it's very interesting. But she's under all this pressure. And remember, this nunnery, like it's like her own like biological sisters and cousins are like some of the sisters in this nunnery, because this nunnery is like the only place where women of Jewish descent can be nuns. So it's like her family, her friends, her community. And if she gets branded a heretic, they could literally take all these women out and burn them, or just like torture them to death in some other way. So you have this woman who is having horrible physical issues. And at times during this, she is literally locked in a bare cell, and she has to like write about her most interpersonal spiritual experiences. And as she is writing it, there are like Dominican friars with the Inquisition like going over it line by line and deciding if like she and everyone else in the convent will be killed based on what this is. It's just a wild situation. And stranger still, it's a really good prayer guide.
Really?
Yeah, no.
So how is she perceived today now in the Catholic Church?
She is a doctor of the church. She is
She's a saint, obviously. We know that. But like, so this all this controversial stuff? No one really. It's just that no one. It's just how did they go from interrogating her and burning down a library to all of a sudden she's a saint?
Like,
what happened?
She like pulled off the triple locks. She gave a very detailed, extremely humble, theologically scrupulous account of perfect union with God.
Wow.
So like,
I just want to pause real quick. I forget how serious it is for a lot of these Catholic or Orthodox theologians when it comes to these ideas that are, and they're still hashing them out even now. It's like the Nicene Creed isn't the end all be all of like Christianity's settled now. Like, no, these are like the ideas. These ideas are being like built upon even right now. They're still, and like, so it's 1970 and Pope Paul the Sixth, right? Is that who it is? He's the one who decides that she's going to be the doctor of the church, right? Is that what happened?
Maybe that's when she was made a doctor of the church. She was made a saint. She was recognized as a saint within like 40 years of dying. So it was in like 1620, 1630. So I think while she may have gotten more, like the turnaround on like her reputation as sort of spotless happened very much. And you also have to remember, like, it is much easier for a nun who is suspected of heresy and who like gets through it to be recognized as a saint after she's dead, because like that's also a way perhaps of patching up some of the horror and complexity. But anyway, do you want to hear about the 7 tiers of heaven?
Yeah.
Lead to perfect union with God.
So, before you tell us this, she wrote this down, and people, or did she? How do we know this? What is this?
Down. We have the transcript in her own hand is still maintained by nuns in Spain.
All right, so yeah.
So the nunnery is still there. Yeah. And we even have the corrections made by like her. So like her confessor made like some corrections, but very minor ones where like, and then it went to the Dominican friar. So we have like very strong records of every element of what was happening as she wrote it. And we have it, her own handwriting.
Now, real quick, before you say this, the Book of Jeu is a 3rd century text. How is this related to that? Or is it not? Is nothing to do with this?
So the Book of Jeu is, I would say, more than any other Gnostic text or even Ascent text within Judaism or Christianity that I know of. The Book of Jeu is the most, this is how you do it. Here are the spells you say. Here are the ciphers that you hold in what hand. If you do these things, if you plug these commands into the mainframe of reality, you will get this result. Like, you got very detailed diagrams. There
Very
is a
mystical too.
process.
Yeah.
Oh, it's very mystical, and it's Jesus giving it. So, I mean, I'll tell you the real twist up front.
Sure,
When
whatever.
you look at the Book of Jeu and the interior castle together, while there are significant differences, specifically that the Book of Jeu says basically you can do this yourself if you know the spells. And basically, Teresa says you can't do this unless God gives it to you to do. And you have to and Book of Jeu says, hey, you have to be very attached to doing it exactly right. And St. Teresa says, no, you have to basically love God, but be non-attached to any specific outcome. And if it happens, it happens. However, despite all that, they are extremely, extremely similar in many ways that I want to get into. So
I'm just going through these little diagrams that are part of the. It's probably nothing.
No. I think it's actually really useful.
Oh, so, yeah. These are the ions. Okay.
So, okay. You were showing one that shows the nested heavens. So, okay. This diagram is also a diagram, the top one, not the round Trivial Pursuit circle, but the one with the Coptic in the middle. So this is how Teresa, to a certain degree, is also describing the interior castle. Now, what is the interior castle? So, this idea of the seven heavens, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So, Teresa takes the seven heavens and says the human soul, because one thing that we know about the human soul is that Christ is in the center of our soul, that we are the temple of God. And so the one place where you can be sure to find God is looking within yourself. And so you enter into yourself by prayer. And you have the seven layers of heaven essentially within yourself that is your own soul. And in the seventh inner mansion, you meet Christ, who is God, and I'm not making this up, have marital unity with God at the center of it.
Makes me think of Song of Solomon.
Very much so. Although in the Book of Jeu too, there are references to what you see in the Gospels about the bridegroom and all that. So it's one of those places where it is significant, the whole bride and, you know, you're the bride and Christ is the bridegroom and it's a love story kind of thing. That's emphasized less in the Book of Jeu, but it's also there. But for Teresa, that image is incredibly important. But let me just run through the seven interior mansions. Each is within the last. It's one of the clearest outlines, I think, of what this all means. So the first one is the inner courtyard. Teresa says this is when you're first entering, and what she calls the reptiles from the outside world can get into this mansion and cause you trouble. And, you don't have any ability to move yourself. You don't have any ability to think. You don't have any ability to do anything. But you can pray. So then the second mansion, you're practicing prayer a little more, and you can start to see things and understand, but you can't act. The third mansion, you're going deeper in, and you're learning not to trust in your own ability, but rather to just do good for other people outside of yourself. So the deeper you go, the less you're trusting your own work and the more you're just doing good in the world. The fourth one has this very interesting image. This is where you learn, that you have to be, for Saint Teresa at least, non-attached to the concept of spiritual practice itself. You have to be non-attached about practicing prayer and meditation. Isn't that wild?
That's what that kind of reminds me of like how Zoroaster is depicting how to be. And what is it called? Not the Goth. No, it is the Gothas. Yeah, and that's how. And if you read the Gothas, this is something. This sounds like Zoroaster tries to tell you how to. He says the similar things like this.
Okay, so absolutely, and also Book of Jeu mentions Zoroaster, and
here's I know that.
Okay, here's a big twist on that part. In the Books of Jeu, Zoroaster is associated with Melchizedek.
I could see that.
But also, if you look at the actual, and not this is totally off topic, but so I was thinking, if a lot of the Hebrew Bible was written, because like a lot of the Genesis stuff isn't mentioned in the pre-exilic texts, and since they're having to deal a lot with Persia, what if Melchizedek just is Zoroaster?
Could be.
But I don't know.
The order of Melchizedek in the Christian sense could very well be like the order of the Magi, like the order of this like Persian order. That's why you have Jesus being brought by 3 Magi. That's why you have, it's there. That could be what they're getting at, is a different order.
Maybe that's totally off topic.
Yeah.
But so in the and this is one of the big differences where we're talking about the Book of Jeu. You have all of these like very specific magical rituals that you have to do, spiritual activities, and to include literally baptism, and like it really seems like it's talking about baptism and communion, and we'll actually get to communion or Eucharist. We'll actually get to that later in the deeper and deeper into the mansions. But so the fourth mansion, she uses this image of the spring of water versus the aqueduct, where the spring kind of comes directly from God, and the aqueduct is this thing that requires all this human effort and control. And so she says that prayer and meditation are like the aqueduct, bringing the water, the water being grace, or like whatever it is that you get from prayer and meditation. And it is just, I don't know, to me, that's a really fascinating thing because, I'm someone who tries to have a good spiritual practice. And I think that it's in some ways extremely freeing to learn that we don't have to do this spiritual practice. But at the same time, if you look at the Books of Jeu, it's always clear that the guide is Jesus. So in that, Teresa is also saying that you can only move deeper in some ways if Jesus gives it to you to move deeper in. I'm not sure if it actually disagrees with the Book of Jeu. Mm-hmm. So fifth mansion, we're going even deeper. This is where she uses this narrative of the butterfly, where she talks about how silk is made. And she talks about the little worm eating the mulberry leaves and spinning itself a cocoon, and then it dies in the cocoon, and then it becomes this little butterfly. And she is using this as a metaphor for
metamorphosis.
Yes, but what's interesting is she is putting this metamorphosis at the 5th level. Like in some other systems, that metamorphosis, that theosis, that
the final level, right?
Yeah. So much like the Book of Jeu puts a lot of the Sethian stuff down a couple of levels, Teresa is able to even put theosis, like divinization, down a couple of levels from what she sees as the true height.
Wow.
So, and she, continues to emphasize that she's not saying that anything can be added to God, but, like the cocoon is the work that we do ourselves. But the cocoon, the transformation that happens in the cocoon is only possible through God. And then the little butterfly goes out and begins to have a life that can only work in God. And she's even aware that adult butterflies don't eat in the same way. It's really cool. So, Mansion 6. This is weirdly where it's like she hits real life. She's talking about all the trials that even after you've had this transformation, even after you've had this theosis, here is a non-exhaustive list of things that she talks about being serious trials in Mansion 7. Negative community opinion. People thinking she's faking her mystical experiences. Physical illness, physical pain, isolation, being condemned by confessors, fear of torture, mental health and cognitive issues. But for all those, she does say by the time you get to the 6 of the mansion that the devil has lost a lot of his power over you. And in this one, she spends a lot of time, like almost as much time as she spends on the entirety of other mansions, going through the complexities of what it is like to be spoken to God and how you can know if God is actually communicating with you, and what to do if you think God is communicating with you, but people don't think God is communicating with you. Like the 6th mansion, I think more than the others, you really get a window into a woman who is like in a lot of physical pain. She seems pretty scared. Seems like a lot of people are angry at her and are saying negative things about her, and she's deeply hurt by that. It's a level of like personal vulnerability that you really don't see in the 3rd century Book of Jeu. You don't.
And it might have to do with the whole saint culture of being a martyr for the faith.
Entirely possible, because she's also strongly connecting over and over. Well, the best thing that God can give you is the opportunity to have a life like his son's, and his son experienced so much pain. So by experiencing pain, you're experiencing unity with Christ. And, this unity with Christ thing is to some degree in Jeu, but it's, I don't know, to me at least, it seems much more developed in Teresa. It's, because this, like, and she goes on a lot about how you can't, in your like fully rational mind, totally experience the 7th mansion. And so like you can go into the 7th mansion and you can have this full supernatural experience of it, and what you bring back is valuable. And she talks about how it's of almost incredible and unending value, but she can't fully explain it. And but what she is saying is in the 7th mansion is not just like an audience with Jesus Christ, and she like clarifies that, like, and the fact that she has to clarify that when she is talking about the marital act, like she's like, but also get your minds out of the gutter. But literally, she is talking about, like having carnal knowledge of Jesus through the marital act, through sex. Uh,
Oh, I don't know if you want to read that. Seventh mention of Saturn L.
So in the Book of Jeu, especially First Jeu, they heavily talk about the planetary spheres.
Yeah.
And so, like, it is not out. There is a very, like, intense connection between the idea of, like, the solar system as a map of the inner human being.
Yeah.
And Teresa is very clear about it. Like, literally, the human soul is made in the image of the heavens, and there's as much difference between God and the heavens as God and the soul. But in that inner part, in the act of union with God, she also seems to say that, like, the true gnosis is in that union with God, not only having a full experience of God, but also having a full experience of God's experience.
Wow.
But it's all framed around love, and she ends it by.
Have you ever read the son of Aristotle, Nicomachus, wrote this Orphic manual about the spheres, the music spheres, and there's the 7 planets, and there's like 7 circles or whatever. It almost makes you wonder if this is somehow getting passed down into the Christian, especially Gnostic Christians, who they love Aristotle, they love Platonism, Peripatetic school, they love the Cynics, they love the Stoics. They seem to be very much influenced by the Greek philosophers as much as the Jews are from their prophets. So, like, instead of having Jeremiah and Isaiah and Hosea, they look up to Aristotle and Plato, and it's kind of interesting to see that. And I think that's where these Gnostics are basically. It's Christianity, but they're looking at the Greek philosophers more than they're looking at the prophets. Not that they're not doing both. They're looking at both, but are leaning more in this Greek side, I think.
I mean, I think that's a big part of it. I think, I like, especially with the Books of Jeu, I think there is a very heavy Egyptian influence.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm still trying to understand. I'm actually, God help me, I am looking at taking some Coptic classes. If I can learn Coptic, I've got a buddy who I'm this close to convincing to do it with me. But there are just so many connections. And it's one of those areas where these, because there are mystic narratives in ancient Egyptian religion as well, that's traveling through the different heavenly realms.
Right.
And having to deal with divine figures along the way. So, what comes down in both of them, both Jeu and Teresa, is that, like in the Book of Jeu, like as I was saying at the end of it, the disciples are like, why would the reality possibly be like this? And Jesus says, look, the real answer is, just use my name. They'll take care of you. So in both cases, the answer is like, I mean, this sounds simplistic, but it's like, well, if you really want to escape the horrors of reality to the highest heaven, probably you should get baptized and participate in the Eucharist regularly and participate in Christian community. Womp womp.
Right, of course.
But like, if you look at the Book of Jeu, like one of the ways that's different from like the Secret Book of John is, despite having, it has Yaldabaoth, it has Samael, it has Barbello, it has Sophia, it has the invisible God, all the, everybody short of like Captain America, Iron Man, and Batman or something. It's playing all the hits. But ultimately, the Book Book of Jeu is not saying that like physical reality is fake. It's just saying that physical reality is sort of at the bottom of the emanatory ladder. And while the lower beings on the ladder in the Book of Jeu are like less and less perfect, there's not the same kind of like cosmic tragedy that you see in the Secret Book of John. So, as I was saying earlier, like the twist of this is that I think the Book of Jeu like really makes sense in a proto-Orthodox context as something that could be seen as like over the line, but is ultimately like portraying a mystical system which is very, very similar to what even, more than 1,000 years later is still recognizably and defensibly like quote unquote orthodox. So I think that the big secret of like Gnosticism is that kind of Gnosticism is just Orthodox Christianity, and Orthodox Christianity is just Gnosticism to some degree.
Right.
But maybe that's overstating it. And I think,
well, I think the difference is one of them is a practice that the individual undergoes for the Gnostic side. The Orthodox side is a prescribed system that's given to you by your bishop or your priest, and you just follow suit, and you just don't have to think about it. Whereas the Gnostic is actually doing the work. Like, it's like the difference between a coder, someone who's doing coding online, versus someone who's just on the websites that are already built for them.
Well, except that the process, even on the more Catholic, like the Teresa side, also requires a constant searching, is also requiring a huge amount. Like, Teresa isn't saying that you don't have to build your spiritual aqueduct via prayer and meditation. It's just that that spiritual aqueduct is ultimately not going to be enough on its own to get you to the heights of the interior reality of God.
Yeah.
At the same time, even in the Book of Jeu, it's clear that the rituals on their own, like, another very important connection between the two. The second Book of Jeu specifically mentions women disciples. So, importantly, both the Book of Jeu and Interior Castle of Saint Teresa are also explicitly things that included women followers of Christ and were like about women's experiences. So there is this like strong connection where like one of the things about the Interior Castle is it is not just received from the higher ups. Like one of the things she says near the end when she's talking about like in the sixth mansion, where she's talking about the very real difficulties of life, she says, if you learn these prayer techniques, then you can go into the castle and you can enjoy these mansions whenever you want to, even without your confessor's permission. Like, so it is not, so, this is always sort of the paradox of Christianity. Are you actually giving up power by being a Christian, or in the spiritual life of Christianity through that kenosis, through that emptying of self, are you actually building up more power and more agency and more freedom for yourself? So it's a little bit of the mystical flipping and reversing.
Sure.
And, but like, I think ultimately it's amazing how much, even as the Book of Jeu does have far more complex rituals, far more specific, and, you have to do X, Y, and Z if you want to get to the next step. ultimately, it does come down on the fact that this is all dependent on Jesus to work. And this is all basically just calling on the name of Jesus. So that there is a difference between like how much power you have. Like if
Yeah.
I, you know, if I, how many, like, can I do something supernatural through my own natural actions, or can only God do supernatural things? So I frankly am just blown away by the the uh, the fact that 1,200 years between these two texts, and they come to such similar beliefs. Well, and they even use similar language. Like in the Books of Jeu, they talk a lot about the treasuries of light. This is above the aeons. And it's a little complex what it means. I'm still working through it. I think like in First Jeu, it's about moving through the treasuries, and Second Jeu is about moving through the aeons.
Right.
But in the sixth mansion, Teresa is like trying to talk about what it means to go beyond this place where you can fully understand it. And the metaphor she uses is of visiting this mansion. And in this mansion, there's a secret room that is full of these vessels of light. And if you can see each vessel pouring light into the next, and you might not be able to remember the entire room because of how strange and beautiful it is, but you get an impression and something is communicated to you. So even this like very odd image of vessels of light, which are each outpouring and filling one another, you have like hints of it in common between the two texts.
Yeah.
So, and I just wonder if
there's, and now is there anything about the three different baptisms in this text as well? Because in the Book of Jeu, you have the three baptisms: water, fire, and then Holy Spirit. Is this reflected in this other later text as well?
So it does not specifically mention baptism, but it talks a lot about the sacraments sort of generally, and it talks about communion. But it does seem like you would have to go through baptism first to be able to do confession. One of the places, though, that there's a stronger connection. So after the three baptisms in Second Jeu, there's also like the mystery of the forgiveness of sins. And so this heavy focus on Christ being able to forgive your sin as an essential part of being able to either ascend through the heavens or descend into the center of your soul, which is also a form of heaven. Those are heavily connected. So it's that forgiveness of sin that allows for that travel.
I love looking at these things.
Oh, yeah. Well, but also, I think another thing that both Jeu and Teresa do is both of them are very clear that they are not giving a totalizing view of this interior heaven. But like Teresa talks about there being millions of rooms in these mansions.
Whoa.
How you should feel free to explore the rooms above.
Do you know what I just thought about?
Left.
This is like somebody thinking about what is it called where you can virtual reality. Somebody's like she's thinking about virtual, like how to construct the software for virtual reality space, but like in a spiritual sense. Like she's thinking in her head like heaven is going to have all these possibilities, millions of different rooms with different possibilities and things you can do, things you can explore and experience. And like she's trying to materialize this in her mind way long before even computers are even a thing. So it's kind of interesting what she's thinking. She's thinking very much ahead of her time. She's thinking like she's trying to envision what the possibilities of reality can be.
And it's, I mean,
That's
it's
real mysticism right there. That's some deep mysticism right there.
exactly, because like one of the ways she frames it is like the outer world is at the bottom of this stack of realities, and the realities as you go deeper mansion by mansion are becoming more real. So
Whoa.
she flips it so it's like heaven, earth, and the outer darkness, but it's heaven that is the place that like Jesus is in you. Like that is heaven. This is this I mean the archons are like and she's very clear, like there are demons all over the place and
Right.
angels and things. But these heavens, like, I don't know, they're so strange because they're sort of like a middle ground between the individual person and the ultimate divine. And I don't fully understand how it works, but it's I find she talks about the soul being like a diamond, and even if you put a black cloth over the diamond, it still has the light in the center of it. And I find myself thinking about that a lot.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
There's a couple of super chats if you want to, unless you want to finish off what I think we pretty much explained.
No, yeah, I've explained the course into the inner self. Hey, friends at home, go meet God.
Right. This is some real deep stuff right here. Oh, my last question I want to ask you before we go to the super chats. How does she become so accepted if she's quote unquote, a heretic?
Because she wrote it all down and she was able to explain her entire spiritual reality.
They just respected her gnosis basically and said she's above.
Yeah, no, she wrote it all down, and I mean literally
that's pretty badass if you think about it.
Yeah, no, like literally
She's like the Wayne Gretzky of theologians. She's like the goat of theologians.
So
that's crazy. That's cool to think about, actually.
Yeah. So the Maid of Orleans, Joan of Arc, she was also put on trial by the Dominican order. Joan of Arc was a very spiritual, powerful, smart person. She could not talk her way out of being burned to death. Teresa of Avila talked her like,
and then not only talked her way out, became a saint.
Yes, Teresa of Avila
having crazy
grains, having seizures, locked in a cell.
That's that alteration magic. You know what I mean? That's like you have the magic to mess with people's minds, and instead of them killing you, they look up to you as the greatest person ever and make you a saint and worship you. That's some real that's amazing.
Flipping it.
You gotta respect it. You gotta respect it. Yeah, absolutely. You gotta respect it. Let's see what we got. There's some good questions. I was looking at them. Imposter Sir Spence, thank you for the super chat. Did Teresa have any influence on Henry VIII and his detachment from the Catholics? Good question.
So Teresa is super anti-Protestant. She ends the interior castle with a shout out for the Lutherans to repent. And by Lutheran, she also means the Anglicans. I'm not sure it's
However, Henry VIII was not a fan of the Protestants either. That's why he started his own thing. He kind of was aligned with the Catholics up until they wouldn't let him marry his next wife. And then he decided, I'm going to make my own church so I can marry my next wife. But before that, he was one of the biggest voices against the Lutherans.
It's true, but then he teamed up with the Lutherans.
Sure.
If you ever look at the 39 articles, there's a lot of the 39 articles, which were the foundational Church of England, we're gonna be both Protestant and Catholic thing. There's a lot of Calvinism and Lutheranism in there. So
Sure.
when Teresa says Lutherans, she absolutely would mean the Church of England. But so that's all to say. I think Henry was a little earlier, and Teresa, but also while Teresa is condemning,
They were alive at the same time. Well, okay,
right,
no, you're right. He became king when she was born.
right,
He's older than her. You're right. But they were alive in the same time. But yeah, you're right. He is much older. Yeah.
yeah, but like Portugal and England have always been, and Teresa is very, very aware of world politics.
Yeah, no, that actually answers that question. There's no way that she can be influencing him if he's already in his reign by the time the year she's born.
Yeah.
So it's if anything, it's the other way around. Like he can't be. Yeah.
And also Henry destroyed a lot of the monasteries and took their money. So like monasticism in Britain took a heavy, heavy hit under Henry VIII.
Yeah. Thanks for that super chat though. But at least we got to at least we can see if it's true and if it's even possible, which it probably isn't. But good question though. Cindy, thank you for the super chat. Do you think? Oh, did I skip one? I skipped. Someone said I skipped one. I think. Oh wait, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. Never mind. Do you think they are descendants of Carpocratians?
The Cathars?
Yeah.
It's possible. It is possible. My great dream would be to go on a big archaeological dig and find some like primary source documents from the Cathars that hadn't gone through the Inquisition. I would love to find like a Cathar family Bible that explains, here's how we're connected. Here's how we're connected to the Carpocratians. Here's how we're connected.
If I'm not mistaken, the Cathars lived in communal lifestyles, like little communistic life, little pockets inside the in the empire. That's exactly how the Carpocratians ran their society.
Yeah. Well, and there were a number of groups. Like
that's true. That's kind of like how they all do it. Yeah. But
there's another group in southern France at the time called the Waldensians, and they had an extremely crazy theology. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
They believed that Jesus loved poor people and that the rich people should give up their money so that the rich would not overwhelm the poor and that everyone would have enough to eat. Isn't that terrible? Shame on them.
Well, Carpocratians said that if you wanted to come and live with them, you had to sell your property. And they cite Acts 5 for this, or 3, or whatever. You have to sell your property, keep the money, give us all your money, and then you're allowed in. And then we'll take the money and we'll do what we need with it. But you're going to be equal to everyone inside of our community, and that's it. And you can never leave. You're part of this community until you die.
Well,
that's how the Carpocratians ran their communities.
Right, and that's how the Cathars did it too, and that's also how the early Christians did it. So,
if I'm not mistaken, Cathars thought the Old Testament God was a different God than I could be wrong though.
I mean, according
they had the idea of the monad and then the Yahweh or something, like Yahweh is one of the something like that.
So, according to some of the texts we have, they believed that there was a good God and a bad God, kind of Zoroastrian style,
which would be lined up with Carpocratians if that's the case.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's entirely possible. Also connecting it to the Book of Jeu, it's possible that the way that it is talking about baptisms in Second Jeu is as a final end of life thing. And in the same way, the Cathars, their main sacrament was called the Consolamentum, which was a forgiveness of sins thing that was done with people at the end of their life.
Check this out. This is from World Encyclopedia, and it says, according to Malcolm Barber, the Cathars believe, this is just like the Carpocratians, by the way. They believe that the devil, I just pulled this up, I didn't even know this till right now. They believe that the devil was the author of the Old Testament, except these books: Job, Psalms, Solomon, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Book of Jesus. Oh, Sirach. Okay. A book of Ecclesiasticus, Isaiah, Ezekiel, David, and the 12 prophets. So there you go. There you have it. There's the answer to that question. So that's, if this is now, according, this is one scholar, but still, if he's correct, if he's got some good reason to believe this, like if he's got some real good primary sources for this, then the answer to this question, Cindy, is yes. Right? Even if it's not directly, it's, through lots of centuries later, they're following the same ideas,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes with a lot of mysticism, you wonder how much of it is directly connected and how much of it is separated people coming to the same conclusions by having similar experiences,
Yeah, I agree. It's like the allegory of the beavers that build the same dam, two opposite sides of the world. Those beavers aren't talking to each other. They build the same dam though because they want to have a dam. So you would think there are ideas that can be repeated twice by two different types of people because they're getting at the same thing.
Right. It's like convergent evolution. It's like species don't have to be directly related to, given similar environments, develop similar adaptations.
Yeah.
So, no, it's really hard to know. Oh, but also, speaking of the holy poverty stuff, that was something that the Dominican order, like, they did the holy poverty thing specifically to counter the Cathars, because a lot of people were like, well, probably the guy who isn't rich and is like preaching peace is more of a Christian authority than the incredibly wealthy guy preaching burning women and children to death.
Yeah.
Now, I may not be a literate Southern French peasant, but I've heard about Jesus, and I've got eyes in my head for the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. But
Justina, this is a really good question. Thoughts on the Sufi presence in Spain, and did they inform the Cathars?
So I don't think so. So where the Cathars were in southern France, they were in a strongly Christian area. Even on the Iberian Peninsula, a number of the northern kingdoms remained Christian. This goes back to Charles Martel, the father of Charlemagne, who halted the advance of the Muslim forces. So there wasn't that same sort of cross pollination. I have always wondered how much Islamic mysticism influenced Jewish mysticism on the Iberian Peninsula. But
that's probably the better question right there.
yeah, but I will admit, I just don't fully. I have never seen anyone suggest that there was a strong connection between the Sufis and the Cathars. But I don't know. Just because I haven't ever seen it doesn't mean it's impossible.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it's easy to say if it's true or not. But you made a good point though, is that in that same region is where you get like Kabbalah, and if the Sephardis probably are more inclined to be borrowing from Sufi mystics than Cathars are.
Absolutely. I mean, and you have like huge amount of crossover from all over, like Bad King John, like the King John who's often associated with like Robin Hood in like the cartoons and stuff.
Yeah.
So he sent an army to fight in the Cathar Crusade. So like there's Englishmen, there's Frenchmen, there's Italians, and like there's a lot going on in the area. And like even the Waldensians who were targeted in the crusade ended up surviving till this day. There is a town here in my beloved North Carolina in the mountains called Valdez. And it is literally where, in like the 1850s, the king of Sardinia allowed, after like 800 years of anti-Waldensian oppression, allowed the Waldensians to immigrate to America and set up a little textile town in North Carolina. And the Waldensians are still there to this day practicing their religion.
Really? Where? And I'm sorry. Where'd you say that was at? North Carolina?
Yeah, it's in North Carolina. It's about 45 minutes east of Asheville.
Oh,
Uh,
wow, nice.
yeah. I have a friend who's a Waldensian pastor, and so I have talked to them a lot. But you just have to understand, like, it was it. There was so much more.
People are asking how to pronounce that.
Valdez.
No, they're saying Walt Disneyans. What the f?
What Waldensians, Waldensians. They are named after their founder, Pierre Waldo. That's right, Waldo, who came to believe when the Bible talks about God's favor for the poor, it means it. But yeah, one of the first big Protestant groups. So this Gnosticism and mysticism is also directly connected into the coming of Protestantism. Like, it's all bound up together very tightly.
Really? That's interesting. This is a good question right here. Thank you, Samantha. Any mystics in the New World? 1500s.
Absolutely. There is a great book. There is a great book that is.
That's probably why they're so central. The New World is so obsessed with freedom of religion.
Oh, absolutely.
This is the world of free religion.
The title of the book is slipping my memory, but it's like Kabbalah in Colonial America. I'm sure that if you Google Kabbalah in Colonial America, it'll come up. But basically, all of the colonial American theologians, and these are people like Cotton Mather, like the big ones who were involved with like the Salem witch trial, and not just in New England, but among the Catholics and the Protestants in the South as well, and in the Mid-Atlantic. They were all obsessed with the Zohar. They were all obsessed with Kabbalah. And so a lot of like weird things about American Christianity. Hey, Kabbalah and the founding of America. There we are. See, I told you that if you Googled it, you'd find it.
Oh, and the Freemasons had a lot of Sufis there too.
I know my grandfather was a big Freemason, but I know so little about Freemasonry. Like, y'all
look at this. Look at the cover of this. It looks like there's with the columns. It kind of looks like some Freemasonry type art right going on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh well. Speaking of Freemasonry, Teresa talks a lot about the building of Solomon's Temple, and the building of Solomon's Temple being like the development of the inner soul and development of these rooms. So if you want to have a conspiracy theory about this all being about Solomon's Temple.
Oh yeah, if you read the Freemason literature by like what's his name? Mead and what's the big, I can't remember his name right now. About Manly P. Hall. Manly P. Hall and some of these other authors from that time talk about how it's you had these two pillars basically. One of them is Solomon and the other one is Hiram, the king of the Phoenicians, and how they're both like equally as important in the doctrines of the Freemasons. There's a lot about that. There's like entire books about that.
Fascinating. Yeah, Teresa of Avila, by the way, takes a pretty strong anti-Solomon stance. Loves the temple, hates the guy.
Yeah, because it's interesting that she hates him, but like I could see why an Orthodox person would, because he's the one who gets in trouble for worshiping other gods, and like getting in trouble by he had so much wisdom that he forgot to be devoted to forgot to follow the laws of Moses, basically, you know.
No, I mean, I think there is. Well, I would love to at
It's
some
good.
point do a history.
You ever read this?
I haven't, but that looks cool.
Oh man, you have to get it. You have to get this. It's so good. It's so good. Now, it's not like scholarly good. It's not like it's carefully done or anything, but it's so fascinating the stuff that he's writing about. It's just like he was like a Gnostic informant of his time. He's just very much interested in all the different mysticisms and stuff. But yeah, 1928 is when he wrote this.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think we have, like, it is so easy to forget, like, we're just in such a privileged position. We just have access to so much really good scholarship these days. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, none of us have any excuse whatsoever to not be the best possible mystics anyone could be. We've all got to be like levitating and
Right.
saying the whole deal, given all the books we've got nowadays.
Yeah. I think that's it for super chats. Yeah, that was the last one. Anything else you want to? Yeah. What else? That's pretty much it for Teresa. Oh, and how old was she when she died?
She died in like 1580. It seems like she stuck around the convent. She continued preaching, was, of impeccable character. There are a lot of stories about her. And, the hard reality is, even after she died, there continued being really, more and more anti-Jewish laws, even as they were honoring her. So, I don't know. Like, I'll admit, even having read everything she wrote, there is a part of me, and I don't mean to, like, in any way say that, like, the Inquisition was, like, right or something, but there is a part of me that wonders what it was that she was holding back, if anything. And I don't think that she's gonna, like, turn out to be a Sethian Gnostic or anything. And I don't think she's gonna, but I don't know. She is just so heavily monitored and facing such strong. I mean, it could literally be the death of her and all of her friends if she gets it wrong. So I just wonder that, given all that strain, what it was that she wasn't saying.
Yeah, I just found that part about I was talking about with the Hiram legend, and basically he talks about, he says, when Solomon, the beloved of God, builder of the everlasting house and grand master of the lodge of Jerusalem. See how he's throwing in his own language? The lodge of Jerusalem.
No, not the lodge, but the lodge, that's old Masonic language.
Yeah, he's a Freemason.
Oh, yeah.
And he says, ascended to the throne of his father David, he consecrated his life to the erection of a temple of God and a palace for the kings of Israel. David's faithful friend, Hiram, king of Tyre, hearing that a son of David sat upon the throne of Israel, sent messages of congratulations and offers assistance to the new ruler. And then he goes on and, like, talk about the Hiram legend and how important Hiram is to the Freemason history, basically. The secret history of Hiram that the Bible forgot about, basically. It's like one of those type things. It's one of those pseudepigrapha, but like for Freemasons type, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, my grandfather had all these big Masonic books, and one day I really want to go through and figure out what's actually in them. But
it's fascinating stuff. Don't, like, a lot of it's completely, like, easily. There's a lot of stuff that, like, when I said it's not scholarly, what I mean by that is, like, for example, one of the things he talks about in this book, how Christ and Krishna are cognates, and if you ask an expert in languages, they'll be like, no, that's not true. Yeah, Krishna is nothing Christos, anointed, and the other Krishna means something completely different. But, like, he's writing that in his books, like just writing it down like it's, and so that's the type of stuff you're going to deal with. It's not like peer reviewed material, but it's very fascinating. It's very it's very deep. Like they're going deep with this shit. Like it's I like reading it. I like to look through it and get their ideas on stuff. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, when I was in seminary, I had a professor who, she was very smart, but she would kick our butts if we included what she felt was pseudo history in any of our papers. And I think that traumatized me enough to be extremely careful.
It's not a bad thing to be careful, you know.
Yeah. But anyway, I appreciate being able to come and talk to y'all tonight. I just I don't know, I've spent a lot of time with the interior castle over the last 5 months, I guess, reading it with my church. And what a weird, interesting book. Like, I can't recommend it highly enough. It is so much stranger and more thoughtful and like more vulnerably human than I was expecting it to be. And I just genuinely also think it's very helpful in both how similar it is to Gnostic ascent texts and where the differences are, specifically around the question of attachment and non-attachment. And non-attachment's a complex thing, and I don't fully understand it, but here we are.
I still like talking about it. I think it's fascinating stuff. But anyways, I have your Twitter link in the description. Anything else you want to promote or anything, or no?
Not really. I'm working on a book. If it ever gets published, yeah, we'll see what happens. But that's for the future.
Any details on what about her? Do you not want to release that?
Right, yeah, no, okay. But let's let it cook for a while.
Let it cook for a while. All right, gotcha.
You got some magical rituals I need to engage in to make.
You can always come here and plug it. So anytime that comes out, I'll be happy to help you promote it for sure.
Yeah. No, I'm adding 15 more heavens on top of the 60 from the Book of Jeu. Yeah, no. These are the good ones. There's gambling heaven. There's chemical zone heaven. There's the airplane level heaven. It's gonna be great.
Nice. Good idea. Anyways, I had fun. I hope you did too. And you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.